So thanks everybody for coming to the first kickoff of the specification steering committee of the baseline protocol community. And this is being recorded. Great to see you all here. I've got a bit of an agenda, but it's pretty short this time. This is an hour-long call. This is a kickoff. I will propose this at the end of the last meeting of the TSC earlier, so I'll do it in the beginning. I'll propose that we do, unless anyone objects, another meeting like this next week, maybe the same time or thereabouts, and then we will move to bi-weekly very quickly, probably thereafter, and at some point we will go to a steady state of perhaps just once a month with subgroups doing their thing as needed. Are there any disagreements about that? Okay, right. So the first thing is let's go through and very quickly talk. Everybody should introduce themselves, and I've got the tiles up, so I'll just go through and say, York, you're first, and it would be great to just get your name, the company you work for, and the intention that you have for being here. That is, what do you want to get out of this? What is the straight line thing between your efforts here and benefits to your company or yourself? York.
Sure. York Rhodes from Microsoft. Actually co-founded our Microsoft Work back in 2015. This to me is an interesting inflection in time where I think we have an opportunity to realize enterprise usage of the mainnet through the various efforts that we convened going with Consensus and EY going back almost 9 months now, I think, John, to really sort of conceptualize what would have to be true in order to do that. And so I think this is a pretty important vector to actually realize that. And so I'm here to provide my insight on what I'm seeing in the enterprise space from customers we're working with that contribute to actually making this happen from a specifications perspective.
Thanks, York. Stefan?
Oops, I just clicked the wrong button. Yeah, Stefan Bauer from Kaiser Permanente. We're an integrated delivery network headquartered in California. I'm here maybe more from a congruence of a personal view to this, that the mainnet eventually is where things, and I like to come the definition of the mainnet being not specifically necessarily Ethereum, but right now Ethereum, the best one out there. So it's more like that personal insight. I am responsible at Kaiser for the emerging technology management aspect around decentralization. We do have certainly our sort of early stage, prototyping and things going on, particularly also in the drug supply chain space. And so anything supply chain, any others realizing that mainnet is certainly a good path to go, kind of really piques my interest. And thank you for the call last week, John and Heather, to call me into this. I'm very excited.
It's good to have you here, Stefan. Bill, you're next. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Bill, and I'll call on Daniel next. Go ahead.
Hey guys, it's Bill Gleim representing Consensus Health. I'm here to continue to push Ethereum Mainnet as the messaging bus for enterprises, and very specifically focusing on the productization of the zero knowledge proof layer underlying the messaging. So we're working to quantify established metrics and quantify various ZKP DSLs against specific benchmarks, and we're working on an abstraction layer that would allow us to utilize higher level SQL-like query language above circuitry.
Thanks, Bill. How's that secret weapon we sent you doing?
Very well.
Hadassah Elberger, everybody, up and comer in the math of ZK. works with Bill and used to be on our team with Brian and I. Darwin Holmes, or I'm sorry, Daniel Norkin, almost skipped over you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to stay in brand over here. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Vision Blockchain. And as a system integrator in the space, I think that the baseline protocol really fits the need. You know, one of the things that we really pride ourselves on is not being developers of, you know, the blockchain network per se, but what we do is we help our customers implement best-in-class technologies that really fit their business needs, you know. So introducing the libraries that the baseline protocol has really is going to address a lot of challenges. You know, if I could just get into one of the use cases that we spoke about with a fairly large retail organization about half a year ago, maybe even more, they said, well, why should we create our own private blockchain when somebody else is creating their own private blockchain, and then two other of our suppliers up and down the stream are also creating their own blockchain? Well, wish we had this answer back then, but you know, it's never too late. So really happy to join here and help out with this effort.
Thanks, Daniel. Arwen.
Hey, John. Thank you. Hi, Darwin Holmes. I'm with Ernst & Young. I'm our global blockchain CTO. For me, I'm just really excited to see this ecosystem come together in a more cohesive way for both of our client needs as well as for EY as a company. We are building product in our blockchain practice, and there are gaps, right, in the public ecosystem today, and I'm looking forward to collaborating with this group to solve for those. But also in the spirit of decentralization, just the fact that we know that each one of us are not the only players in the space, and I'm just really excited to enter in this journey with you all. Thanks.
It's good to see you, Arwen. Where are you right now?
I'm currently
what part of
home.
the world are you stuck in?
I am stuck at home in New Jersey right now. So we are shelter in place, but just going out for essentials when we need to. But hopefully others are staying safe and doing the same.
Right on. John Stevens.
Hi all. My name is John Stevens. I'm working for Web Cloud, which is a joint venture with AMD and Consensus. And that's probably also why Jorg is also on this call. I know him well. And we're providing basically the hardware infrastructure to help secure and provide validation for the blockchain. All of these apps are going to need places to run that are not just Amazon or Google Cloud. And so we're building out the infrastructure, hardware infrastructure, data centers to run all this stuff. So that's my spiel.
Very good. Thanks, John. Karen?
Okay. Hopefully you can hear me now. Good morning. Nice to meet you all. I'm Karen Scarborough. I work for BP and the Digital Innovation Organization. And as a unit, we look across all areas of more nascent technology for the entirety of the company. So the general timeline on that is anywhere from 5, 10, 15 years out. So there's far more reach of academia and startups and just technologies that we see a long-term value in. So the other unique perspective is that we look everywhere from the very beginning of our supply chain and looking for resources to the end supply chain and how that gets delivered to consumers. So I hope to leverage that broad perspective for the group here.
Thanks, Karen. And Jorg?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So my name is Jörg Roskowitz. I'm in charge of the blockchain business unit inside AMD. And so I'm responsible specific for the strategy inside how AMD can participate the blockchain business, and our main value proposition is currently focused on the security side as a silicon vendor, and we are very proud to work with you guys in the mainnet on the security strategy specific for the secure transactions, making everything more secure. Because I have the feeling, and I think that in the next couple of months and quarters, security will be one of the major aspects in the network.
Thanks, Jörg. It's exciting to have you there. Joseph Bala.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Joseph Bala with Niakova, part of the cloud team, responsible for building all of our client technologies. Really interested in the applications of the baseline protocol within core banking services, as well as partner interactions within banking platforms.
Thanks, Joseph. And we got Steve. And I think Jörg, you're on phone, and okay, so that's where the other one is. Steve?
Hi, so this is Steve Short. I work at BP. I work with Karen, not in the same area though. I come with lots and lots of enterprise application development experience, and I've managed some enterprise application development teams here in BP. So I'm coming in from a microservices design perspective and hope to be able to provide some support in that area.
Yeah. And we have one guest, Brian Chamberlain, who's on the TSC. You want to say hello, Brian?
Hi, Brian Chamberlain. Yeah, as John mentioned, on the TSC, one of the engineers who create the baseline protocol and code base, employee of Consensus, here to just listen in and understand the larger context of what people are interested in and how this system that we've built can grow and evolve.
I'm glad you're here, Brian. And it would be helpful if you could keep an eye on, what you heard on the previous call. If we can, you and Jörg were on the previous one. If you spot any things that we should sync up between the two groups on that I'm missing, that'd be great to have you bring up.
Thanks.
So this is a kickoff call, short call. It's just an hour. And the goal here, you might notice that, first of all, most of the people on this call could be on the TSC just fine. Pretty seriously technical people here on this call. But the notion that we came up with was there is a basic governance job that the TSC does. Basically, it makes sure that the maintainers don't run amok, and that we have maintainers, and that we can resolve disputes in terms of who gets to be on the maintainer group if the maintainers themselves can't achieve loose consensus, and the TSC is responsible, the PGB, for in that way. So that's really the job of the TSC. It's is the nuts and bolts of making sure that engineering moves in a direction and self-organizes, but when self-organization fails, you can lend a hand. But then there was, as we looked at this group of unusually large number of people signing up to be on the TSC, we're like, well, a lot of these folks, and you are, I don't sound like I'm pandering here, but a lot of these folks were both technical, but also very much focused on the business side of things, or the direction setting side of things. And so we created an accordion style organization here where we can expand and contract. We can create subgroups, and you'll notice that we already have 3 solidly industry focused groups already. We have energy sector, healthcare sector, and banking sector already. And then we have a couple of horizontal product group focused people, cloud, DevOps, solutions, and systems, right, with AMD. So verticals and horizontals. And if baseline is going to be have impact, it's going to have impact because people in industries know what to use it for, and people with products, platforms, and services know how to make money on it. Reminds me a lot of like Apache Tomcat in some ways, not every way. And so that's what the SSC, if the TSC's job is to make sure that engineering tasks get done by dint of maintainers and committers, and just make sure that there's governance to that. The SSC's job is to make sure that there's a community of people focused on epics and topics. I'll stop and solicit some thoughts here. I mean, Daniel, you've been involved with a lot of the engineering and some of the direction setting. You have anything to say about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good strategy. You know, just from a high level, you know, when you mention you know, epics, right? My mind automatically goes to my project management days, and I start thinking about the scaled agile framework and say for those that may not know what that is, but essentially it's you know, starting at the top level, you know, determining if your product is going to be focused around government or enterprise, and then it rolls down a little bit more into strategic topics, if you will, right? And then each of those topics then have an epic, and then each of those epics then have features and user stories. So if we categorize that along the same way with what you're describing, then I think wow, that makes sense, especially when developing product.
Right on. I don't know if everybody can see the screen, but I'll try to write some notes here while you're going. And I'll also bring up the, you know, so we've gone through introductions. You know, I should say there's a statement of value I like to say during these meetings, which is everybody here and everybody involved in the community should be able to draw a straight line between what they're doing and their enlightened self-interest. If you're doing something that can't show itself to be important to the bottom line of what you're doing for a living, then you know, something's wrong there, and we should talk about it. Before we go on, let me very quickly have a brief recap of our current impact. In case you didn't know, we have just exceeded, well, I haven't even checked since 4 a.m. this morning, but at 4 a.m. we were at 180 stars on the GitHub repo, and I think 35 forks, and it's rising. And there's already people that weren't involved in the original work that are now making commitments. By comparison, and this is not a haha on Hyperledger Besu at all. We love those guys, but Hyperledger Besu has been out there for about 6 months almost, and they have 185 stars. So there's something going on. We have touched a chord in the community on this subject, and it's crazy. A 1.2 billion in reach off of our original announcement. And it's $11 million in advertising equivalency. It's just a crazy number.
Hey, John.
Yep.
Just really quickly, how are you calculating those two numbers, or what's your source for those two numbers?
The source was our media team who used their tool, and I don't know which tool they used. I can double check, but I did double check it. I'm like, that can't be right. Double check it. And they're like, nope, it's right. And I'm like, oh, triple check it. I didn't want to be throwing those numbers around unless they were very, very sure. And you know, they're professionals, but I did not double check what tool they actually used.
Yeah, it might be because that number is going to change, right? It might also be interesting to just publish that somewhere in our site with reference to like how it's calculated.
Mm-hmm. I will take that action. Check. Check.
I mean, I'm a marketing guy also, so I always am curious.
Yep, got it. So GitHub activity is going up. I think one of the things that we're definitely going to focus on the TSC, need to focus on here with the SSC as well, is what are the metrics that matter? What should we be keeping an eye on that will tell us that we're going in the right direction? I'll just ask people to consider that and maybe bring it up in future meetings. Before we go into the tools, one of the special things about the SSC I should have put in here is SSC governance. Unlike the TSC, the SSC has the task of figuring out how it wants to organize itself, and it's deliberately more vague. Bill, you've been around these things before. Would you like to say a few things about ways that we might organize the SSC? How we should be thinking? What are the principles that we should be focused on?
Yeah, I don't have any preconceived notions on that. I'm looking to determine that collaboratively.
Yeah, John, I think from my perspective, we have sort of set out on a journey that asks the question, what has to be true for XYZ, right? If we are doing work that doesn't answer those questions, that is something we need to be able to keep track of, right? We need to sort of stay on track with getting to the whole point of the reason we've come together.
You have thoughts about what how would you articulate that for us from where you sit? In terms
I think I would probably drill down from sort of the 10 or more original principles down into where does that fall out into a technical working group, and then is that technical working group getting lost in the weeds and not actually answering the question? I think it's an important thing to be able to calibrate against.
So are we getting lost? Yeah. So are we wandering?
Yeah.
And related, although I think a little different, I might add that makes me think about is alignment, which is a special challenge in a large early community that is excited about something that that the newcomers haven't spent a lot of time learning about yet, right? And it's a different mental model. So yeah, staying focused on what we want to achieve and achieving alignment is a key job for everybody. One of the things we talked about on the TSC and we need to talk about here is when you have, it's not one company or even one consortium, but a community, it's all about onboarding. And so I'll let you know that as a person whose day job is this, I will be holding I will hold onboarding sessions twice a week and videotape them and produce them until we get to a steady state. They'll drop back to once a week and et cetera. But especially for the maintainers, we want to make sure that they're all well onboarded, that they understand kind of what the journey has been up until now so that they can intelligently take the journey to the next stage and know at least when they're diverging. There's nothing wrong with divergence, but it's best to diverge when you know what you're diverging from. So onboarding is going to be key.
I also think, and I think, I'm sure multiple people on this call are on the same page with this, but like early deliverables with clearly set expectations on what those deliverables are and how those deliverables relate to proving something, right? That's versus long deliverables that, are not, that may actually achieve the same thing, but because they're such long deliverables, they're not actually advancing the market thinking around it.
I second that.
Yeah, right on. And in fact, I think this could be a hugely impactful thing for the SSC to deliver. And by the way, we can add more people to the SSC who can recruit in. If we can show people, hey, this is not only what we ought to be building, here's why, here's some evidence. So in a way, if the SSC, if the TSC and the maintainers are the engineering team, and this is the product team, the product team's job is the why and the what, or at least providing evidence for why people would want X, Y, Z. And then engineering will tell you about the how, right? So if the SSC is effective at setting those and saying, hey, this is something we would want as BP and as the energy industry, we need these requirements. If we have those requirements, we could do this with it. And if we could do that with it, we're going to have real things happening like this. And here's the evidence for it. Karen, Steve, you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, but maybe, John, I some thoughts like from a more vertical view, right? I think generally speaking, this should be about product market fit, right? And from a sort of what does it do for us to apply this new computational concept or protocol, right? For our sort of external applications that we are building. I think there will be a bunch of more specific requirements or critical to success criteria for this, right? That may need to be worked on. That might not be that much coding and delivering, but maybe also making sure that where gaps are, you have, first of all, a way to point them out and translate them to a timeline, to, right, when they will become bridged, then X, Y, Z better can happen, right? That type of mapping.
I think from an industry perspective too, having a sort of MVP of requirements that is valuable, because we get tied up with a lot of discussion around it when we can start moving quickly on smaller things and make it more of an iterative process. So identifying what we can do first and how a time approach can work is stronger than figuring out the whole scenario of most processes.
Yeah, MVPs would be good, right? I mean, that's how we got here. There's always a dialectic with protocol level things. I remember years ago sitting in more than once sitting in architecture meetings, having architecture meetings with architects about architecture for weeks, and nope, not a user in sight, right? But we knew the plumbing. We just didn't know whether we were serving toilets or dishwashers, right? We're not even sure where the toilets would go in the house, or whether there was a house and whether there'd be people in it. But man, we had the plumbing right. So that's one way to go off the deep end. The other way to go off the deep end is to have no sense of the possible, right? And the art of the possible. So, you don't want to just be building faster horses because people want faster horses. When you've got engineering telling you that you've got this whole new way of going faster. Right. So MVP, this is something that we experienced on the project to date, right? Using SCM as that construct to say, let's stay focused on things that would solve this problem, and let's hope we got lucky choosing a thing that would be canonical, and the lessons learned in that would be generalizable to other things. Time will tell. We hope we got it right.
Well, I think that's actually to sort of meld that with what Karen said. If there are specific challenge use cases, Karen, that you've already identified, I think a proof point to answer the question that John just raised is, can we run an exercise where we take the assumptions we made or the capabilities within the baseline protocol itself, and do they actually answer those specific scenarios.
So, but I would add there is something a bit different to this. So like, okay, it's an MVP for product over something we try to do, which is a standard / protocol, right? So it's more generally this adoption roadmap or the adoption blockers, right, that I think are still out there. So for me, it is still a fairly long road to convince corporations that this is a safe and doable or takeable risk level, right? And then B, to really, so there's still a lot of, like, for example, I'm still not 100% convinced that, it needs all these, shield contracts and so forth, that it could not actually do even more with cryptography off-chain, right? So I do think there is a bit more, like, you guys have been sort of working on this 9 months, and Levi maybe even longer with Nightfall, right? So maybe there is a couple of sort of verification, right? Maybe it's more, on this path to this grand unifying theory that not only should we convey over the mainnet, but also, like, you can still be on the same mainnet and have total different things going that are not necessarily interacting with each other or compatible with each other, right? So there's still a lot, unifying theory that needs to be established, I believe, at least from my perspective, in order for really make this something that can be picked out of this emerging technology weirdness bucket into, like an early adoption, strategy for corporations.
Right. Well, I think the narrative on the cryptography behind it is explaining its use as a strategy instead of just a tool in a toolbox that can really prove advantageous in different business use case scenarios. So shaping that more clearly would help.
Yes,
So guys,
that's key. So I made a bunch of notes. Hopefully people can see some of them on the screen. And one of them that is a good pivot to the next topic, in fact, is keeping an eye on the whys behind these key engineering features, NFRs, components, and explaining them, as Karen said, in ways that that don't just revel in the math of a particular technique, but rather, say, this particular technique is a machine that does this, and I can put that machine in here, and now it's a carburetor or a fuel injector for this engine, et cetera, right? It has a job to do. What is the job? And I think that's a good practice. And given that this is being taped and will be public, I think that's a good piece of, hopefully that'll get into the culture of this community, that we keep an eye on that. But now if we focus on features, NFRs, that's where the SSC, I think, can have a big impact. And as a practical matter, let me take you over to some tools. If I can find there it is. All right. Who is anybody not familiar with using GitHub or ZenHub? All right. So I'll take that as we all basically know the idea behind ZenHub, or GitHub at least. ZenHub, we have secured it's a public project, so ZenHub is something that we get to use. And I'm going to get out. I'm going to cancel out of here and go back. This is something I think everybody needs to know. We will use GitHub as the tool for recording intentions, actions, topics, projects, roadmaps, as well as engineering issues. If you didn't know, ZenHub adds a couple of extra objects that do not exist in GitHub, like most notably the epic object. So an epic in GitHub has some more features to it that you actually, if you threw ZenHub out, or an Epic and ZenHub is a little different from in GitHub. They're nestable. You can have a topic within a topic within a topic within a topic that then terminates in a 2 or 3 stories, each of which is connected to an issue, which are a bunch of or a set of issues that are engineering tasks. This is a little counterintuitive because in a way I wish that ZenHub called Epics something different, because anybody working in Agile knows Epics to be a specific construct. But we will use the Epic, and this is especially important for the SSC, we'll use the Epics feature in ZenHub as a containerization of things. Unless somebody has a violent reaction to that.
In this screen, what's an epic that you point at?
So in this screen, well, I don't know that we've actually created any here. So let me, no epics yet.
Okay, so all we're looking at on this particular screen is a list of tasks.
Those were issues, yes, those are tasks. So an issue equals a task, and a task has a certain format, test-driven, acceptance tests, et cetera, but can be written ideally as action verb first, right? Fix this problem, do this thing. Mm-hmm. It can be a chore, it can be an engineering thing that needs to get done. And at least in my experience, and by the way, I'm speaking as though this is the authoritative thing. I'm making a strong proposal just to get us through it, but it would be great if somebody said, no, I don't want to do it that way. I propose something else, and we can take it up either today or subsequent meetings. So I don't want to discourage discussion on this, but I'll start the bidding on this method. And that is, if it's an issue, it's a task. If it is a epic, it can be either a big giant container like healthcare, inside of which are containers like problem X in healthcare. Those can be all nouns, no verbs in them, right? Just big topics, topic headers that contain stuff in them. Ultimately then going down to actual epics, like, so, such and such can do X, or rather that'd be more like a story, but IBM, we used to call these hills, but effectively large grouping of a discrete set of user stories. And then the user stories are in the format persona X or persona A needs X so that Y. All right, so I as a CISO need this non-functional requirement so that I can do something specific. And the so that, of course, is the key. How do people feel about that method?
So, I mean, I'm okay with just pick a method and move forward with it. I just would want to submit on user stories that I sometimes feel it's way too sort of artificial, and we're not building a web application here, right, where there is a user experience and a user interface. We're building a protocol and the way on how to sort of corporations are being interconnected with a new application that they commonly share and so forth. So I'm just a little skeptical on staying too much with sort of a method that works well for websites, right? But maybe in actual deep level protocol design, we may have something like a problem around that maybe a certain CKP doesn't work in a certain scenario, and I'm not sure you can formulate that with a user story, or if you do, it sounds a little sort of cheesy, like cryptographer X needs XYZ so that it can do that, right? So yeah,
you're so right. And by the way, thanks for adding that perspective. That's exactly that's the kind of conversations we need to have in this team. And in fact, I think that's exactly correct. And the reason why issues are tasks and tasks we don't force tasks into that kind of thing. When you try to force that out, especially on an engineering team, I think it's not pretty, because it just doesn't fit reality. It's kind of what a product manager loves to see, but there's just a lot of things that, fitting it. You wind up with this weird language that takes you time, slows you down, and creates inertia, right? So that's why issues are tasks. Tasks can have their own format. But that doesn't mean, and I'm sure you would agree, that when there is a human that wants a thing so that they can do something, and so that gives a tip to the engineers that they could solve the problem a bunch of different ways, not just the one that you're prescribing. That's usually a good thing, correct?
Yeah, if you predicate it the way you just predicated it, I think we're good. Yeah.
Yeah. So SSC has a lot of latitude here. And of course, I should say for the public, you don't have to be on the SSC. You can get on the SSC. It's a lot easier than the TSC. The TSC is a very fixed small number of people for a governance task. SSC can be larger. And so you can either not wait for the SSC to be on the SSC, just start leading. But if you're on the SSC, then that's part of the job is to set these topics, these agendas, and then try to convince people that these are things that we ought to do.
John, it's Darwin here. I think that and then listening to everybody chime in, I think it's important that we stay focused on what the charter is for what we're building. So I see a couple of buckets. One is validating and enhancing the protocol, and the second bucket is really around the adoption of the protocol. So applications that might be relevant to specific industries, or ideally applications that work across industry. So, preference towards domains like supply chain, where every industry has their own version of that. And I think that lends itself very well to being protocol, translating well to a protocol capability. But that's where I see kind of the two higher level buckets with any kind of user story that we would articulate. In terms of the methodology we follow, definitely supportive of us following an agile one. And I'm certainly okay with lumping into epics as you described and leaving issues or tasks as actually the work that needs to get done. And we can continue to bucket all the user stories and the work efforts underneath this. I just want to make sure that's also aligned with how the TSC is looking to execute. That's an earlier question that I had that I was doing. Is if they're going to be following some sort of iterative development. I know it's an open source project. Some stuff for general open source maintainers, a Kanban approach kind of makes sense for issues to just come in. But I don't know if there was a plan to kind of look at iterative development for the community at large, and that we expect to do more regular releases or updates to the protocol for things that are more feature driven or based on direction given by the SSC.
Yeah, I think that you've touched right on the crucial thing that we have to get right in the next week or two, which is really setting up a series of what is the program of activities. How do we get that alignment? How do we how do we understand direction? How do we set direction? And then, as you said, and I hope I got that right, please correct me if I didn't, Arwen, but that we need to validate and enhance the protocol itself. There are undone things we need to validate, or we need to not validate, but abstract and generalize what was done in the POC. We need to harden some things. And then where the SSC can really add value is, in particular, is saying, hey, as we harden this thing, here's why it has to have these non-functional requirements. I need this kind of speed, or I need this kind of latency for this particular use, and this use is. I have some evidence to suggest that use would be real, right? And so, and if we can, that's the join between enhancing the protocol and getting adoption. Because if we can show real uses with real specifications on why they need a function or a feature, and how that feature needs to, what are the minimum standards for that feature to operate, then we're gonna get the adoption. York, you have a thought there? Oh, you're muted.
All right, multiple mute buttons here. Just to highlight back to what Stefan said earlier, I think also it's probably worthwhile to have on any of these sort of other approaches considered potentially, and why they may or may not have been ruled out, or other approaches that may actually have similar validity, right? I think that's, if Stefan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's sort of what you might have been going at.
Are we thinking about approaches to the protocol itself, or approaches to the work organizing?
Well, I think it's very helpful. We're proposing a protocol that is a specific approach to solving this generalized problem statement, which is, making a mainnet possible to be used by enterprise, right, for transactions. We made certain decisions, right, in the project thus far, and ruled out other approaches. And I think it would be useful probably just to have some of that documented.
So if I can kind of piggyback off of that, York, some of the things that we've been doing in the EEA mainnet use case task force is we've been coming up with a survey to collect non-functional requirements based on different types of use cases across a bunch of different verticals, a bunch of different horizontals. I'm not going to go on the record and say that it's a perfect survey by any means, but it has a bunch of questions. A lot of them are open-ended. Maybe that could be something that could be used as kind of like a springboard to help, collect some of the information out from different stakeholders.
I totally agree.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Daniel. So yeah, we certainly have. I don't even know how long. It's hard to determine what the separation is between the main networking group at the EEA and some of the things that we're trying to do here. Clearly, we don't need to do double duty on use case analysis. We could probably join forces and make sure that we do one set of really good activities around that, right?
Mm-hmm. So I can circulate that among the group, and you guys could take a look at that and just see what you think.
Yeah, we definitely need some connective tissue between the two groups. I mentioned the baseline sessions and meeting at the previous mainnet group, and they were in their minds they're distinct, and we need some formal relationship between the two.
Yeah, that's right. And you just reminded me, Bill, that it's not just mainnet working group in the EEA. It's also the supply chain SIG, the healthcare SIG, right? We're all one team on this stuff.
Yeah, I would even include the trusted compute.
Oh, certainly. They did great work. Okay. So we're adding up a bunch of stuff. In the last 7-8 minutes, that we should turn to how we're going to get something done in the next few weeks. And it strikes me that a pretty simple low-hanging fruit is to organize some subgroups like healthcare, like what have you. So can I ask for everybody? We'll reconvene next week, roughly the same time. If anybody has any issues with this time, then please let me know, and I'll figure it out. We'll send out another survey or whatever to get times. But if this time works for everyone, then we can do that. Also, think about other people that should be on this SSC and how it should be organized, because there's less clarity, deliberately less clarity on the SSC organization. This can be a self-organizing group. The TSC was a lot more hard-coded. This one has a lot of latitude. We can have larger groups, we can have smaller groups, we can have different subgroups. We can have different kinds of connective tissue, as someone said just now. And I'd like to just have the week to be thoughtful about that. We'll come back next week and hopefully, and I will solicit input before the meeting to summarize during the meeting.
And Sean, I would just add, before we segregate too much into the different verticals, that we perhaps should wait with that and first, build a solid foundational sort of understanding. Yes, there is a different demographic around people like representing corporations that will use this versus, maybe corporations that are in or groups that are in here just more like as a product in this, right? But before we, I think, get too soon into the vertical idiosyncrasies, we probably should first and foremost really make sure we have a good foundational understanding what the general aspects of the protocol are.
It's a great point. Does anyone dissent on that? Arwen, you have a thought?
No, I was just giving a thumbs up that I'm fully supportive of taking that approach before we do segment up, just because it will also add additional operational overhead, right? If we're fragmenting this current group before we kind of understand some of the core principles that we're following. I also think some design principles that may be fostered in the TSC would also help on our end. Like if it's a mandate that no sensitive data, for example, is stored right on chain. I think that's a general good practice that most folks follow, but there are regulatory constraints that will require that some more than others for specific industries. So I would agree that we come together first around what the needs are for the protocol and common functionality. I think that's the most important thing versus because if we segment too early, we're gonna run the risk of building something that is bespoke and too unique to an industry, which doesn't add a lot of value in terms of the protocol.
Yeah, that's
a really proof point, but
I'm reminded of conversations you and I had about, and Paul, one of the best things about working with you guys was your understanding of the nuances between going too far in either direction, right?
Yeah, and ideally the solutions that we build and why we're using the protocol-based approach, right? The further adoption of mainnet will come when we come together and building our solutions in a way that is leveraging existing standards so that they're ultimately interoperable. And this is our approach with an EY for the product suite we're building too, that if you're using one blockchain product that EY builds, that's ideally not the only one, right? If I mint a token of value in one solution, I should really be able to use that in another solution that I want to take to market later, right? And that's really where we're going to see a network effect if we can build in this way. So I would encourage us to think that. This is also why I think it's important that if we do break up or fragment into these different subgroups, that there is a real means that we all come together. Because if I build something unique to healthcare and it doesn't feed into insurance, right, then we've kind of failed. So hopefully we can steer clear.
There was an old teacher of mine used to say that walking is a series of unbalances that sum to balance, right? So you walk back and forth a bit, right? You dive into a vertical, you don't go too far, you jump back out, you go, how is this extensible? You think about general requirements. And then you both internal to one person and as a group, you kind of check your six on that, right? And say, well, how would that work in healthcare? How would that work in gas and energy? So it's a dialogue, right? A conversation that needs to be conducted.
Excuse me, John.
Yes,
I was just going to say, and on the point of leveraging existing standards, I want to understand better what your intention and the intention of other members here are in leveraging the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance client specification and the standard there.
Could you say that again, Bill? I don't know if for anybody else you broke up a bit, I think.
So we have the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance client specification, which addresses some of the needs we'll have here, and I would like to have a trajectory toward establishing, and formalizing our usage of that spec.
Yes. So, one of the things that, let me take us over, and maybe this will be the last couple of minutes. One of the things that, if you haven't seen the documentation, please do peruse it.
By
And
the
you'll
way,
see down here.
amazing job on the documentation, John.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. It was a big team effort. But I think it's just a big giant placeholder. Everything inside the baseline protocol work is the work ahead, right? So we stole some of EEA's work here. This is just a format, though. The must-haves and the should-haves and the must-nots and thou shalts. But we got to fill all this in, and yeah, this should be the what we point the EEA to say, hey, this is our input into that standards process. This is what we think needs to happen in the EF. And if you look at, there's two levels here. One is, what is it that we actually need in a mainnet? I think most of us are inclined to think that the internet's mainnet ought to be, or is likely to be, Ethereum or ETH2 over time. But we call it the mainnet for a reason, because we want to stay intellectually honest to the notion that we have some requirements, and those requirements are the important thing, right? So what are those? And so we can define that here, and then we can define the mainnet evolution. What are the things that outside of the actual baseline protocol componentry need to happen and aren't in a state yet where we want them to be in order to get adoption by enterprises? And a couple of them are Socrates. If I was a CISO or a CTO of an enterprise and somebody told me that my infrastructure is now going to be reliant upon Socrates, I might be a little concerned because it says it's experimental. So what can we do to influence the increasing of support for Socrates? Or an alternative, strictly speaking, it doesn't have to be Socrates. It could be another DSL. I hope anybody who's a big Socrates fan doesn't get anxiety over that comment, but just strictly speaking, academically, it has to be that or something else, and it has some requirements that we got to put on it. What does ETH2 need to look like? The one that I keep on getting is the noisy neighbor problem. How do we deal with that? That's one thing that is a consistent worry that I'm hearing from executives who know what they're talking about in the space. And in ETH1, you can go a long way doing the baseline approach right now in production, as long as you don't mind the noisy neighbor problem too much. And some people will argue that that's overblown, but the point is it's still there. Gas. York, thanks a lot. Actually, I think you're just prompting me that we're out of time. And that is correct. We're 2 minutes over, in fact. So I will end it there, just to say that these are the places that we want to look at. And you'll also see that performance stats, specs has nothing on here yet. So that's the job in front of us, getting to this stuff. Standards, what the protocol ultimately will be, why it's there, and what's in it. Any parting shots? Any last words? Any thoughts?
Thanks, guys. Thanks, John.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here, and we're really grateful to see you all. We'll see you next week, roughly this time.
Have a good day, everyone.
Yes, thank you all. Stay healthy and safe. Bye.